Nobody believed she still existed. People heard rumors, like myths passed from one village to another, that somewhere in the farthest corner of the valley, hidden between fields of mulberry trees and dust roads, there lived a woman who still wove silk by hand. Not in a factory, not with digital machines, not with the speed the world now worships, but with a wooden loom, soft light, and two hands that time itself seemed to respect Dot in a world of noise. She worked in silence. Factories produced thousands of rolls a day, but she produced one cloth a month. The kind of silk that didn't just shine, it breathed, as if every thread carried the warmth of a heartbeat. Old men in tea shops would tell the story. She is the last one, they said, the last woman who still remembers how silk was born, not manufactured. Tourists came looking for her. Businessmen came offering deals. Reporters came wanting interviews. Some even brought translators and lawyers and contracts. But nobody ever came back with a picture. Some said she refused every visitor. Politely, some said she simply kept weaving and never looked up. Some said she didn't. Refused them. She just acted like she couldn't hear them over the sound of her loom. Dot, and yet, the world kept trying to buy what she made. One man, a famous collector from the city, placed $100,000 in cash on her table. He spoke loudly, proudly, like he was buying history, not stealing it. The villagers said she didn't even stop weaving. She just looked at the money once, then pushed it back with the same calmness a mother uses to wipe dust off a sleeping child. "I don't sell what has a soul," she said softly. There were no insults, no arguments, no anger, just a sentence, simple, clear, sharper than a blade, because she didn't weave for money. She wove for someone she lost. They said she talked to the thread sometimes, as if it listened, that sometimes the silk shimmered like tears under sunlight, that sometimes her hands slowed, not from age, but from memory, as if something in her chest tightened before she breathed again. Nobody knew who she had lost, but everyone knew the truth. Every thread she pulled was a conversation. Every pattern she shaped was a prayer. Every inch of silk held a name. The world didn't know, but she refused to forget. People around her lived fast. They scrolled, they clicked, they bought, they replaced. But she sat on the floor with a loom older than every child in the village and created something no machine could ever copy, a cloth made of seconds that never rushed, and love that never faded. Her name was Zainab. Some people said the name with respect. Some said it with curiosity. Some said it with the kind of quiet sadness reserved for people who have lived too much life, too quietly for too long. Her hands never rushed, even though the world around her did. Outside, buses honked, phones rang, factories screamed with metal and speed, but inside her small mud brick hut, time didn't walk. It waited. Each thread passed through her fingers like it was alive, and she treated it like it had a soul. The silk wasn't just fabric to her. It was memory stretched into line. Touching it was like touching the past, and maybe that's why her hands moved as if every gesture mattered. Gentle, intentional, like a prayer. Children would gather outside her window, sitting in the dust, their school bags still on their shoulders. They whispered and watched through the cracks in the wooden door. Not because she asked them to, but because something inside that room pulled them like a story too real for bedtime books. She never spoke while weaving. Some thought it was a rule. Some thought it was grief. But those who paid attention realized something deeper. She didn't speak because the loom was already speaking. Tack, 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 tack. The sound echoed softly, steady like a heartbeat. Not rushed, not desperate, just alive, refusing to stop. The floor was worn beneath her feet, a mark carved by decades of rocking that loomed back and forth, thread by thread, day by day. The smell of raw silk mixed with old wood and sunlight that slipped through a single cracked window. Sometimes the children tried to talk to her. Baji, why don't you use a machine? Baji, don't your hands get tired? Baji, how long does it take? But they never got more than a small smile. A smile that held stories they were too young to understand. So they sat, and they listened. And without realizing it, they learned something the world had forgotten, that not all work is supposed to be fast. The villagers whispered things, as villagers always do. She doesn't weave for money. She could have been rich. They say people from Lahore came, offering contracts and cameras. She refused them all. Some say she is weaving her last cloth. But the whisper that spread the most, the one the old men at the tea stall said in low voices, was the one that made even the children fall silent. She is not making silk. She is finishing a promise. A promise to someone who never came home. Nobody knew the full story. Some said she had a husband who died in a factory explosion. Some said she had a brother who vanished during floods. Some said she had a son, a soldier, someone too young to die, someone too loved to forget, but nobody dared to ask her because there was something sacred about the way she wove, something that made even the wind soften its footsteps before entering her home. The loom stood in the center of the room, like an altar, not a machine, a witness. Around it were small pieces of cloth, unfinished edges, torn experiments, threads that had snapped from being pulled too hard on days when memories hurt more than her fingers admitted. She kept no clock. She worked through mornings, afternoons, evenings. The sun moved. The shadows changed. But Zainab did not. Sometimes days passed without her stepping outside. The only proof she was alive was the sound of that loom, tapping the air like someone knocking at the door of yesterday Kalan tack. Tack, tack. The villagers said that if she ever stopped weaving, the silence would be unbearable. Some of them worried for her. Baji, you are getting old. You should rest. You need help, don't you? You can teach others, pass your art, don't let it die. But she would always smile and shake her head, not in refusal, but with a kind of peace that nobody understood, because they were asking the wrong question. It was never about the art being passed on. It was about the person she was weaving for. And as long as that silk was unfinished, she wasn't ready to stop breathing either. Sometimes, late at night, when the village slept and even dogs stopped barking, a faint voice could be heard from her window. Not full sentences, just murmurs, as if she were talking to someone the rest of the world couldn't see. A name, prayer, a memory. And then she would touch the silk, very gently. The way someone touches a photograph they've looked at 1,000 times but still aren't ready to put away. That's when people understood. She wasn't weaving for history. She wasn't weaving for legacy. She wasn't weaving so the world could admire something rare or ancient. She was weaving to keep someone alive, thread by thread, heartbeat by heartbeat. Promise by promise. And until the last thread was tied, until the final knot sealed the cloth and the grief it carried, she remained not the last weaver of silk, but the last keeper of a love so strong, even death had failed to silence it. The truth came out the day a young village girl finally asked the question everyone else had been too afraid, too respectful, or too heartbroken to ask. Baji, who is the silk for? It was an innocent voice, soft, curious, not demanding, just a child's voice reaching toward a mystery the whole village carried like a shadow. Zainab didn't answer immediately. Her hands froze mid-motion, the silk thread resting loosely between her fingers. She didn't look at the girl. Instead, her eyes drifted to a single strand of thread out of place, a thread she touched gently, almost the way someone touches a scar. She closed her eyes, and in that moment, the room felt different. as if the walls had breathed out, as if the loom, which never stopped, held its rhythm back out of respect. When she finally spoke, her voice was not weak, but it carried weight, the kind that comes from loving something you can no longer touch. For my son, she whispered. Not a word more, not a word less, but the air shifted. Even the child felt it. She didn't say, my son who died. She didn't say, my son who never came home. She only said son, as if the love was still alive. And only the world had turned silent. After a long pause, she added the sentence that broke the room in half, the last thing he asked me for. Before the war took him. The young girl didn't move. Her small hands curled into fists slowly, the way children do when they don't understand pain but feel it anyway. Pot on the stove stopped boiling. A bird outside stopped singing. Even the loom stopped breathing. The wooden frame that had never paused now stood still. As if listening, Zainab didn't cry. Her grief was not loud. It was woven into her bones, quiet and disciplined like the threads she worked with. This cloth, she said, her voice softer, is the shroud I never got to give him. Her hand rested on the silk the way a mother rests her hand on a sleeping child. Careful, protective, unable to let go. No one spoke. Not the girl. Not the neighbors outside who heard every word through the thin walls. Not the peddler who was about to knock but froze with his hand in the air, because everyone understood something in that moment. She wasn't weaving fabric. She was finishing a goodbye that life never allowed her to say. The world had taken her son. The war had taken his body. History had taken his name, but she refused to let time take his memory. Every thread was a heartbeat she refused to bury. Every knot was a prayer she never got to say at his grave. Every inch of silk was her way of giving him, at last, the dignity the world denied. And so she wove. Not to sell, not to display. Not to be filmed or praised, but so a mother could keep her promise. When the final thread was tied, Zainab didn't cry. There was no shaking, no breaking, no collapse of the quiet strength she carried. Only stillness, a kind of silence that seemed older than the room itself. She lifted the silk from the loom the way a mother lifts a sleeping child, slowly, carefully, afraid the world might tear it away again. She placed it gently on her lap, not like a piece of fabric, but like something that once breathed. For a long moment, she didn't move. Her hands rested on the cloth, her fingers tracing the edge as if memorizing the shape of goodbye. Sunlight fell across the silk, and in that soft glow, the threads shimmered like water, alive, but never moving again. Word spread through the village that she had finished it, the last hand-woven silk in the world. And like every rumor that carried both truth and weight, it traveled fast. Days later, a documentary team arrived, 3 cameras, 2 men with microphones, a woman with a clipboard full of questions they thought mattered. They introduced themselves proudly. They listed the channels that would broadcast her story. They spoke of history, culture, craft, words heavy with importance, but empty of understanding. We want to record you, one of them said. You're the last of your kind. Zainab looked at the cloth in her hands, then at the camera pointed at her like a weapon of memory theft. You came to capture history, she said quietly. Nothing in her voice was angry. It was calm, the way truth often is when it has already survived everything else. But I only came to finish love. There was no debate after that. No negotiation. No second offer. The team stood there, uncomfortable, holding equipment worth more than her entire house, but unable to capture the one thing they came for because they had no place in it. Zainab folded the silk one last time. Not hurried, not afraid. With the slow grace of someone finishing a prayer. Then, without shoes, without a scarf, without anything but the cloth in her arms, She walked out of the hut. The villagers watched from doorways. Some tried to follow but stopped halfway because they understood this was not a moment to be interrupted. She walked straight to the graveyard. No tears, no words, no audience, just a mother returning something that never reached its destination. She knelt by the unmarked patch of earth, pressed the silk against her heart, and held it there longer than a breath, shorter than forever. And when she stood up again, she left the cloth, not on a grave, but with the silence. That was the last day the loom ever made a sound, because some things are not created to be sold. Some things are not meant to be filmed, framed, priced, or owned. Some things are created to be remembered, and some loves never get buried. They are only folded and carried home.